There is a strange moment that happens when you stop trying to fit into the room. You begin noticing how much energy you used to spend making yourself easier for other people to understand. You answered when you wanted silence. You agreed when you had doubts. You stayed in conversations that left you empty. You chased goals that looked impressive, but meant very little to you. And for a long time, you probably assumed the problem was you. Maybe you were too sensitive, too quiet, too analytical, too selective, too independent, too difficult to understand. But what if some of the traits you've spent years trying to correct are actually signs of something much more important? Not superiority, not perfection, just a mind that does not easily surrender itself to the expectations around it. The reference material describes a recurring pattern. People who feel different often possess unusual combinations of introspection, cognitive depth, emotional regulation, curiosity, independence, and resistance to conformity. And that difference comes with a price. Because the same qualities that give you depth can also make you feel isolated. The same awareness that helps you understand people can make superficial relationships exhausting. The same independence that protects your freedom can make belonging more difficult. So let's look at 10 behaviors that may reveal something important about the way you operate. Not so you can convince yourself that you're better than everyone else, but so you can finally stop treating your differences as defects. First, you genuinely need solitude. You don't necessarily dislike people. In fact, you may love certain people deeply. But after enough conversation, noise, social expectations, and emotional stimulation, something inside you begins to shut down. You go home, close the door, put your phone away, and suddenly, you can breathe again. There is an important distinction here. Some people become tired from socializing. You may feel mentally emptied by it, because while other people are simply participating in the conversation, you may be processing far more than the words being spoken. Tone, facial expressions, pauses, contradictions, what someone said, what they avoided saying, what they probably meant. That kind of constant observation consumes attention. So solitude isn't necessarily withdrawal. Sometimes solitude is maintenance. It's where your mind finally gets enough quiet to return to itself. And if you've spent years apologizing for needing that space, perhaps you don't need to become more social. Perhaps you need to become more intentional about where your social energy goes. Second, you cannot leave a question alone. Someone gives you an explanation. Most people accept it. You ask why. They answer. You ask why again. Then another question appears, and another. People may have called this overthinking. But there is a difference between endlessly worrying and genuinely wanting to understand something. Your mind doesn't seem satisfied with the first explanation. You want to know what sits underneath it. Why did that person behave that way? Why did that relationship change? Why did you react so strongly? Why do successful people sometimes sabotage themselves? Why do certain patterns keep repeating? This hunger for understanding can become exhausting. But it can also become one of your greatest advantages, because shallow answers provide quick comfort, deep questions create understanding, and a person who is willing to remain uncomfortable long enough to understand something often sees possibilities that others miss. Third, you don't automatically care about what everyone else cares about. This one can look like laziness from the outside. Someone sees you capable of doing something, but you don't seem interested. They tell you that you lack ambition. They say you're wasting your potential. But perhaps the problem isn't a lack of energy. Perhaps it's a lack of meaning. You can work incredibly hard when something matters to you, but when it doesn't, forcing yourself to care can feel almost impossible. You aren't motivated simply because someone tells you that something is prestigious. Money may not be enough. Status may not be enough. Praise may not be enough. You want to know why the effort matters. That can create friction with environments built around external rewards, but it also protects you from spending 10 years climbing a ladder that leads somewhere you never wanted to go. The important question isn't, why can't I be motivated like everyone else? It's, what deserves my limited energy? That is a very different question. Fourth, you notice what people don't say. You enter a room and sense that something is wrong before anyone explains it. Someone says they're fine, but their voice doesn't match their words. Someone laughs, yet something about their expression tells you the laughter is covering something else. Someone appears confident. You notice the hesitation underneath it. You may not always know exactly what you're seeing, but you notice. The danger is that this awareness can become exhausting. When you constantly observe people, you sometimes discover things they aren't ready to acknowledge themselves. And once you've seen a pattern, it's difficult to pretend you haven't. This is one reason highly observant people can experience relationships differently. They don't only hear what someone says, they pay attention to how the entire interaction feels. But there is a lesson here. Understanding people does not mean carrying them. You can recognize someone's pain without making it your responsibility. You can see someone's insecurity without trying to rescue them. Awareness becomes wisdom when it is combined with boundaries. Fifth, when everyone else panics, you become quiet. People sometimes misunderstand emotional control. They see someone who isn't reacting dramatically and assume that person doesn't care. But emotional steadiness is not emotional absence. You may feel everything. You simply don't believe every feeling deserves immediate action. When something goes wrong, part of you steps backward. You observe, you process, you wait. Then you decide what needs to happen. That ability resembles what psychology calls distress tolerance, the capacity to experience intense emotion without allowing it to completely control your behavior. And this is deeply Stoic. You cannot always control what happens, but you can create a space between what happens and what you do next. That space is where self-command lives. Sixth, you've often felt older than your age. Maybe even when you were young, certain conversations interested you more than ordinary social concerns. You wondered about meaning, purpose, death, identity, why people behave the way they do, why some relationships survive hardship while others collapse. You weren't necessarily wiser than everyone around you. You were simply asking certain questions earlier, and that can feel isolating. Because your friends may be focused on things that feel urgent to them while your mind is already somewhere else. The mistake is turning this difference into arrogance. Maturity doesn't mean looking down on people who aren't interested in the same questions. It means understanding that everyone develops at a different pace. Your responsibility is not to make everyone think like you. It's to use your own awareness well. Seventh, you are deeply aware of the distance between who you are and who you could become. This one is painful, because somewhere inside you is a picture of the person you know you could be, more disciplined, more courageous, more focused, more honest, more capable, and you can feel the distance. Other people may look at your life and think you're doing fine, but you know what you're capable of. That gap can create a strange kind of grief. You're not grieving something you lost, you're grieving something you haven't become yet. But be careful. Potential is useful only when it becomes action. You can spend years imagining the person you could become while avoiding the uncomfortable work required to become him. So don't worship your potential. Build it, one decision at a time. Eighth, shallow conversation drains you. You can talk about the weather, weekend plans, work, sports, what someone bought yesterday. But eventually, you want the conversation to go somewhere. What do you actually believe? What changed you? What are you afraid of? What have you learned? What do you regret? What are you becoming? You don't necessarily need hundreds of people. You need a few relationships where you don't have to perform. That is an important distinction. Social quantity is not the same as emotional depth, and if small talk exhausts you, don't assume you have a problem. Small talk has a purpose. It helps strangers establish comfort. But it isn't where every relationship needs to stay. Ninth, silence doesn't scare you. You can sit in a room without reaching for your phone, take a walk without headphones, drive without needing something playing, sit beside someone you love without constantly talking. That kind of silence can reveal a lot, because when the external noise disappears, you begin hearing your own thoughts. And many people avoid that experience, not because they're weak, simply because being alone with yourself can be uncomfortable. But if you've spent enough time examining your thoughts, silence can become peaceful rather than threatening. You don't need constant stimulation to prove that you're alive. You can simply exist, and there is a quiet strength in that. 10th, you don't need your beliefs to remain unchanged. There is one final trait that may explain more about your mind than almost anything else. You are willing to change your mind, not because you are easily influenced, not because you lack conviction, but because you care more about understanding what is true than protecting the version of yourself that was right yesterday. Most people say they are open-minded until new information threatens something they deeply believe. Then the conversation changes. They stop examining the idea and start defending their identity. But you have learned to separate the two. An idea can be wrong without making you a failure. A belief can change without meaning your past self was foolish. And admitting, "I hadn't thought about it that way," can be a sign of confidence rather than weakness. This requires something surprisingly difficult, the ability to tolerate uncertainty. You don't need every question to have an immediate answer. In fact, the deeper you look into almost anything, the more questions you tend to discover. That can frustrate people who want certainty. For you, it can become part of the attraction. You would rather understand something slowly than accept an easy answer simply because it makes you comfortable. And this changes the way you learn from life. When something goes wrong, you don't have to turn it into a judgment about who you are. You can ask, what happened? What did I miss? What can I learn? What should I do differently next time? Failure becomes information instead of an identity. Criticism works the same way. You don't have to believe every criticism thrown at you, but you also don't have to reject all of it just to protect your pride. You can take what is useful and leave what isn't. That ability creates a quieter kind of confidence. Not the confidence of someone who believes they are always right. The confidence of someone who knows they can be wrong, learn, adapt, and still remain themselves. And perhaps that is what makes this trait so powerful. You are not attached to being right. You are attached to becoming wiser. That distinction changes everything. Because once you stop treating your opinions as part of your identity, disagreement becomes less threatening. You can listen without surrendering. You can question without becoming cynical. You can change without losing yourself. And eventually, you begin to understand something that many people spend decades avoiding. You do not need to protect the person you used to be. You are allowed to outgrow your old beliefs. You are allowed to discover that something you once wanted no longer matters. You are allowed to change direction when you realize the road is wrong. You are allowed to become unfamiliar, even to people who have known you for years. That isn't inconsistency. Sometimes it's growth. And this brings us to the deeper meaning behind all 10 traits. Because none of them are really about being better than other people. They are about becoming less dependent on the outside world to tell you how you should think, feel, behave, and live. You need solitude, so you learn how to be comfortable with yourself. You ask deeper questions, so you learn to think beyond the first answer. You are selective with your energy, so you learn what actually deserves your effort. You notice what others miss, so you learn to understand people without losing yourself in them. You remain calm under pressure, so you learn that emotions do not have to control your actions. You feel older than your age, so you learn to take meaning seriously. You see the distance between who you are and who you could become, so you learn to turn potential into discipline. You crave meaningful conversation, so you learn to value depth over quantity. You are comfortable with silence, so you learn not to run from your own mind. And you can change your beliefs, So you learn that growth is more important than being right. Look at the pattern. Every difference comes with a responsibility.